Hello. Today we will be building the Mudwatt Experiment. The Mudwatt Experiment uses a microbial fuel cell which generates electricity from the naturally found microbes in the soil. The Mudwatt Experiment consists of two main parts: the fuel cell and the basic board. Let's start by constructing the basic board. You'll notice here that I have a standard basic board with a header board, an app board, and the breadboard. All three of these components make up the basic board. You'll also notice these wires at the bottom. The red wires are power wires, which allow me to connect whatever it is that I'm connecting to power. And the black wires are the ground wires, which allow me to connect it to ground. The materials I will be using to construct the basic board portion for this Mudwatt experiment are a pair of wire strippers, a pair of pliers, a pair of clippers, a resistor, which is 10 kilo ohms, a yellow wire, a blue wire, a green wire, the wire box of wires, and a temperature sensor. You'll notice here that the temperature sensor has already been calibrated. If you are using a new temperature sensor, I highly recommend that you calibrate the temperature sensor first. All right, let's get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my green wire and connect it to ADC0, located here. I'm going to connect it to the bottom portion of my basic board, which is only attached to the ground wire. This is the common connection between the basic board and the Mudwatt experiment. Next, I'm going to attach my 10 kilo ohm resistor over the same distance with the green wire shown here. You'll notice that I've placed the green wire on one side of the basic board while the ground wire is on the other side. I used the resistor to conjoin the two. Again, this is going to allow me to connect the basic board to the Mudwatt experiment. Next, I'm going to attach the blue wire onto ADC1, shown here. You'll notice that the blue wire is just one dot above the green wire. This wire connects to the bottom portion of my power and ground wire, shown here, and it is the power for my temperature sensor, which will go into my Mudwatt experiment. This will allow me to take temperature readings from inside the Mudwatt. Finally, I will take my yellow wire and plug it into ADC2, like so, and finally connect that to the other power and ground shown here. This will allow me to now connect my calibrated temperature sensor to the basic board. You'll notice that I connected the temperature sensor using the red wire on the temperature sensor to the red wire onto the basic board. Now let's move on to the microbial fuel cell, well, the Mudwatt. The Mudwatt consists of several components. We have two anode-cathode pads, one of each, delineated by a green wire and an orange wire, shown here. Previously, I had attached a screw on each side of the Mudwatt, or the anode pad, And I'm now going to attach the orange wire for the anode into the anode pad. It's easy if you can curve the wire around. That way there is a strong connection for the wire and the pad itself. So once you've once you have hooked the wire over, you should be able to just kind of slip it through like this. And now I can, grab it and let it hang. You should do this with both the anode and the cathode. One thing I am omitting from building the Mudwatt is the soil. Obviously, the soil is very important to the Mudwatt experiment, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I am choosing to leave it out. I will go over how much soil to put in where later on during the construction phase. Furthermore, more than just the anode and cathode pads, we have another temperature sensor, the actual container itself, and some modeling clay, as well as a pair of pliers and perhaps a pair of scissors or a knife. In addition to a pair of pliers and the scissors, we should have 2 Scotch locks, shown here, for the wires, like so. We will attach the anode and cathode wires to the Scotch locks with their respective wires later on. Let's move to construction. First, you want to drill a reasonably large hole, approximately 2 or 3 millimeters in radius, on the top of the container, shown here. This is to allow us to get all of our wires into the actual Mudwatt experiment, and will allow us to input the temperature sensor into the Mudwatt. Next, it would be useful to attach the anode and cathode wires to their pads, and then have them ready. And finally, it would be useful to attach the Scotch locks to your power wire and your ground wire now. Next, you'll also want to go grab a bowl and fill it with soil so you can put the soil into the Mudwatt as needed. Now, once we have our anode and cathode pads ready to go, the method of preparation for the Mudwatt experiment goes like this. First, we are going to have a very thin layer of soil on the very bottom of the container. Next, we will place our cathode, the ground wire, on or inside the Mudwatt container like so. Notice how the wire, the green wire, is sticking up and out of the container. This is so we can place the wire over the 2 holes on the actual container and have them stick out. Next, you're going to want to fill the Mudwatt container with even more soil until approximately the 4 line. So you're going to want to fill the container about halfway up with soil. Once you have filled your Mudwatt about halfway up with dirt, you are going to want to place the temperature sensor through the top of the lid of the container and pull it through like so. And then you're going to want to place your temperature sensor through a hole inside the middle of your anode pad. This is to allow you to take temperature readings of the mud. So now the temperature sensor shaped like this, where it's pulled through the top and through the anode pad. And you're going to want to place the anode pad approximately just on top of the dirt, like so. Now, take the green wire and fish it through the smaller holes, like so, and take the orange wire and fish it through the other one, the other small hole in the lid, like so. Now it's just a matter of making sure everything is nice and snug. We can now fill the rest of the container with mud. Once it is filled properly, we can close the lid and attach our Scotch locks with our power and our ground. The green wire connects to the ground, so we're just going to place the green wire inside the Scotch lock. You'll know you've placed the green wire correctly when the Scotch lock itself is tight. It is not loose. So we're going to attach the orange wire to the red wired Scotch lock, and this is our power, like so. Great. Finally, we're going to take some modeling clay and plug in the hole on the top of our Mudwatt. This is to prevent the water from inside the Mudwatt from evaporating. Now that we have completed our construction of the microbial power cell, it's time to connect the power cell to the basic board. The first step is to connect the temperature sensor onto the basic board. You'll notice earlier that we had delineated the temperature sensor with the blue wire. So we're going to take the red wire on the temp sensor and make sure it is on the same line as the basic board's red wire. If everything goes as planned, the order shown here should be red wire to red wire, blue wire to the orange middle wire, and the ground wire to the yellow wire on the temp sensor. Now that we have that, let's move over to our cathode and anode. The red anode wire should connect onto the left side of the resistor, closest to the green wire, shown here. The black wire of the cathode should connect on the right-hand side of the resistor, closest to the ground wire. If all goes according to plan, your setup should look something like this. ADC2, the yellow wire, is connected to the control temperature sensor. The blue wire, located on ADC1, is connected to the temperature sensor inside the Mudwatt. And the green wire on ADC0 is our connection between the power and the ground on the Mudwatt. This concludes our construction of the Mudwatt experiment.